more speech, right? Have you ever been to one of these more speech rallies, one of these anti-racist rallies in front of the Nazis or the fascists or the white domestic terrorists? I have. Heather Heyer has. You know how fast that rally, that I'm just here exercising my speech rights, you know how fast those can turn into violent encounters with Nazis? Because it turns out, Brian, that the people who march around talking about the desire to do violence against minorities are also the same people willing to do violence against minorities. And so having some cognitive nuance, having some ability to distinguish between speech that is just speech and speech that is actively in the process of inciting violence against people who look like me is important, and certainly something that the ACLU is more than capable of doing.
With hindsight, Ellie, how would you... Well, okay, Nadine, go ahead. You go.
Oh, thank you so much, Brian and Ellie.
Defending
the
speech.
ACLU actually was the organization that advocated for the current strong standard that protects even advocacy of violence, but draws the line, and I think it is the appropriate line. Ellie, I'd be interested if you disagree. That what is not protected is intentional incitement of imminent violence that is likely to happen imminently. And that line was drawn unanimously by the Supreme Court in 1969 in a case where the ACLU's counsel of record, the name might sound familiar to you, Eleanor Holmes Norton, longtime representative, non-voting representative of the District of Columbia and the first African-American woman to head the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, fully committed to equal rights and racial justice, but to this day strongly supports the ACLU's position and the Supreme Court's position in that case.
Are you saying that you're drawing a distinction? I'll let Ellie get in on this in a minute. The distinction you're drawing, just so it's clear for the listeners, if I have you right, is people should be able to go into public in a group and say, I think we should kill Jews and black people. That's okay. Saying, let's go kill Jews and black people right now is the only thing that's not okay. Is that an exaggeration?
It's not the only thing that's not okay, Brian, because the Supreme Court has recognized other exceptions to free speech. And again, the overarching principle that the Supreme Court enforces is it's usually called the emergency principle. Speech may be restricted when it directly, imminently threatens or causes certain specific serious harm, and there's no other way to prevent that harm. Now, in Charlottesville, the tragedy was not the speech, which couldn't have been more odious. The tragedy, as documented by a nonpartisan report that was commissioned by the City Council after the fact, was that there was inadequate law enforcement at every level. There was failure to adequately staff, failure to communicate. Where Heather Heyer and the other demonstrators were mowed down, there wasn't a single police officer around. That was a failure.
Let me get Ellie to stop back in on this. Ellie, go ahead.
You wouldn't need adequate law enforcement. You wouldn't need more cops. You wouldn't need more police if you weren't having people out here advocating for the death of minorities. Look, if the Brandenburg standard, if the current Supreme Court standard, where it draws the line between speech and incitement of violence, if that was a good standard, if that was working as intended, then Donald Trump and Josh Hawley and Mo Brooks would be in jail right now. They're not. They're not in jail right now because where we've decided to draw the line between speech and incitement is wrong. It's not helpful. It's not working. So, no, I don't agree with the ACLU standards. I don't agree with the Supreme Court standard of where we've drawn the line between incitement and speech. And I think, again, when we talk about the ACLU's commitment and need, and again, I agree that we must defend speech. But when we talk about their need to defend Nazis, to defend white domestic terrorists, when we talk about that, what we are talking about is not speech, it is violence. And we have to do a better job, and we are capable of doing a better job of distinguishing between speech and violence. It's not it doesn't have to be this absolutist thing where like everything you say except for like 8 magic words is okay. No, we can do a better job. We can have more nuance in this argument.
Ellie, how do you respond to the argument that almost any censorious attitude affects less powerful minority groups in the long run, even if policies restricting speech were meant to protect them.
Sure. I mean, that's not wrong. I understand that most of the time the people in power are not going to be on my side. All right, I accept that as a fact of life. But what I reject is this, again, notion from free speech absolutists that the only way to protect me is to defend the people who would try to kill me, right? Like that is one of the widest standards that we have in this country. That somehow the only way to protect the speech rights of minorities and underrepresented groups is to zealously to the last defend the speech rights of the powerful majority who wishes to do harm. The difference, the suggestion that we cannot tell the difference between protest for an extension of justice and equality versus rallies in favor of a white ethno-state. The notion that the law is so myopic that it can't tell the difference is offensive to me. I don't disagree that it's probably right, that we are probably being accurately descriptive of what the law can do, but that's the only way.
Ellie, you use your free speech rights very well, but you're not giving me a fair opportunity to respond, and to respond not only in a defense of the ACLU's historic position, and the historic position, by the way, of the entire civil rights movement and racial justice organizations and human rights advocates around the world, because the alternative of going back to the pre-emergency standard, when government did have more latitude, and in other countries it still has more latitude to prevent and punish speech that it is not proposing such a direct emergency, that gives the government too much discretion. And that discretion predictably is used over and over and over again to silence the voices of those you and I would consider to be on the right side of justice. And we are not talking only about history. One of the ACLU's clients today is DeRay McKesson, a national leader of the Black Lives Matter movement, who is being prosecuted and civilly sued for speech that he gave advocating Black Lives Matter, denouncing police violence and police killings, and that has been attacked as hate speech. We know that government officials have attacked it as hate speech, that law enforcement and intelligence officials have attacked it as terrorist speech. There was a lawsuit that succeeded in the lower courts trying to hold him and therefore the BLM movement personally culpable, because at one rally where he was speaking, an anonymous person threw some kind of brick and injured a police officer. So they are being accused of having violated the Brandenburg Standard. And we know that critics of BLM and other protesters are charging them with having instigated the assassination of police officers. So if you want to loosen the standards and give the government more power to punish speech because of an indirect potential connection it might have to violence, then mark my words, it is going to be precisely those who lack political power, including advocates for racial justice, pipeline protesters. We've seen it all over the country. We've seen the laws that have swept across this country seeking to punish protesters who are protesting the status quo. That's where the power balance lies, and that's why free speech is especially essential to the racial and social justice causes that the ACLU is also fighting for.
Ellie, go ahead and respond to that.
But Professor, I of course am saying that people like DeRay deserve a defense. I am of course advocating for DeRay's position. I think what's happening to him is wrong, and I'm glad that the ACLU is defending him. The question, though, on the table is whether or not the ACLU has to defend everybody, right? Like, the problem here is that the Nazis and the fascists and the people that we're talking about, they're not hard up for lawyers, all right? Josh Hawley has a lawyer degree. He can go defend the Nazis if he wants to. Jones Day can go defend the Nazis if they want to. The Nazis have lawyers on their side. So why is it incumbent upon the ACLU, a nonprofit, mission-driven organization that gets funding from donations from people like me? Why is it incumbent on the ACLU to be the ones defending the Klan and the Nazis and all the awful people? Why can't the ACLU just defend the good people?
I have a personal stake in this, Brian, which I think is relevant, which is I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. So I certainly am no fan of the Nazis in Skokie or the white supremacists in Charlottesville, and yet I fervently believe that it is incumbent on the ACLU not to defend those people. We don't defend them. We are defending a principle which is essential to come to the defense of every cause in this country, including the human rights clauses that the ACLU is also committed to fighting. For example, in the Skokie case, we pointed out that the very arguments that were being made to silence the Nazis in that predominantly Jewish suburb with many Holocaust survivors 10 years earlier had been made in another town in Illinois, namely Cicero, with a very different demographic, where they were trying to keep out Martin Luther King. His speech was seen as hateful and offensive in their community. So that exactly is why the ACLU needs to continue neutrally defending the principles, regardless of the context. And Brian, if I could say, I think it's very interesting that Ellie's critique of the ACLU is diametrically the opposite of the critique that was portrayed in Michael Howell's article in the New York Times. That article suggested the ACLU is not sufficiently rigorously continuing to defend controversial speech, whereas Ellie is making the opposite point, that we're continuing to do so too much.
All right. Let me tell our listeners that we can take a few phone calls on this. I wonder if we have any ACLU members or donors listening right now. Is this an issue for you with the organization, one way or another? 646-435-7280, 646-435-7280. For Nadine Strawson, former president of the ACLU, and Ellie Mistal, justice correspondent for The Nation. In the Times article, Ellie, the main examples that they used to show internal discord at the ACLU were not examples of cases that they wouldn't take, but of tweets mostly put out by individual staffers or local chapters. There was an example of one staffer who tweeted that a book that called Being Transgender a Craze or a Fad should not be in circulation, that anti-trans book. Another staffer once tweeted disapprovingly when the Trump administration strengthened due process protections for male college students accused of sexual assault under Title IX. Traditionally, the ACLU is for protecting the rights of the accused. To some people, these views represent a troubling change. Do they to you, Ellie Mistal?
Yeah, no, look, the reason why I'm not defending the article, right, why I'm arguing about the issue and not the article, is because the article was just another piece of anti-woke cancel culture propaganda, right? There are people in this world who used to, we don't have to name who they are. There are people in this world who used to walk across this country saying whatever they want to whoever they wanted without consequences, right? They could just say, they could make a slur, they could make a joke, they could do whatever they wanted without facing any consequences or pushback. Now, there are consequences and pushback. If you say, you might lose an endorsement deal, right? You might not get your My Pillow ad on television, right? Now there's consequences and pushback, and these people are sad about it. And they want somebody to help them. They want somebody to care that they used to be able to make slurs about people, and they can't anymore. And that's what that article is about, right? That article is, why isn't the ACLU defending my mean tweets? Why isn't the ACLU defending alleged attempted rapists who get onto the Supreme Court? Why aren't they helping me? That was that article. Right, and so no, I don't think that article holds a lot of water. I don't think that the ACLU, since I do not think the ACLU is duty bound and obligated to defend Klansmen, I certainly do not think the ACLU is duty bound and obligated to defend mean tweets. Come on.
Nadine.
The mean tweets, the tweets that were critiqued in particular were of individual ACLU staff members who were making statements that seemed at odds with the ACLU's institutional positions. And as Anthony Romero, the executive director, pointed out in the article, and I fully agree, we defend the free speech rights of our employees to dissent from ACLU positions. It should be clear that they are speaking for themselves individually and not for the institution. And I would expect no less of an organization that, number one, defends free speech rights of employees. You don't have to give up your individual free speech rights as the price of having a job. And number two, defends debate and dissent about everything. All of the points that, Ellie, that you've been making, we debate those points within the ACLU, and I think that's healthy. I think it would be unhealthy if we did not constantly revisit and re-examine these positions.
This is WNYC FM, HD, and AM New York, WNJT FM 88.1 Trenton, WNJP 88.5 Sussex, WNJY 89.3 Netcom, and WNJO 90.3 Toms River. We are New York and New Jersey Public Radio. Let's get a couple of calls in here before we run out of time. And Craig in Westchester, you're on WNYC. Hi, Craig.
Then I'm sitting here.
Hi, Brian. Thank you so much. I would like to get the feedback from the and Ellie.
I can't enjoy the life the way I should.
Unfortunately, you're breaking up so bad. Let me try somebody else. Perry in South Orange, you're on WNYC. Hello, Perry.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I hope you can hear me well. I'm calling because I'm intrigued by this conversation, but I'm going to ask that we zoom out for a moment. As a community educator, I'm aware of something called the pyramid of hate, which we teach to children and their parents. To do with the idea that if we allow hateful conversation, speech, that it is directly related to the increase in other kinds of diminishments for other people and violence. And I believe that what we're seeing in our society at the moment is the breakdown. We're getting to violent behaviors because we do allow speech that is insightful. And so while I don't want to weigh in on this particular debate about the role of the ACLU, I do think that it's an important piece of the larger conversation.
Perry, thank you very much. Davis in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Hello, Davis.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. Very nervous, but I'll try to make my point. You brought up the ACLU lawyer who wanted to ban this book, and I am a freelance journalist. I cover gender. I've been directly affected.
Who wanted to stop distribution of an anti-trans book, that in particular?
Yeah, and I haven't read this book, but I know what it's about, and it's important that it's allowed out in the world, and I get that individual lawyers are allowed to tweet about things that are not part of the ACLU, but I think it's really important to talk about how that affects especially journalists and the public narrative. So what some people are calling hate speech is often just a difference of opinion. And when there are lawyers for the ACLU actively trying to shut down not only the publication of books, and trying to shut down stories in the media that disrupt the narrative that they're constructing, the argument they're constructing because they're lawyers, and especially research about kids and gender identity, that what happens is those of us in the media are no longer allowed to report on them. And it ends up being this cascade effect that may not be government censorship, but it certainly leads to self-censorship, and it affects the style guides of these various news outlets I work for, and I find it really frightening to have the ACLU, people who work there, actively advocating censorship and saying that research or anything that interrupts their argument is hate speech, and there's a real misuse of hate speech, and some of the stuff they're actually just facts, or they're research that we really, really need to look at so we can do right by kids.
David, I'm going to leave it there. We're almost out of time. I know that that particular ACLU staffer says in retrospect, as I understand it, that he wasn't ever actually trying to stop the book from being circulated. He was just saying it deserves not to get circulated. But let's get a last thought from each of you. Ellie?
Man, do you know how much self-censorship every African-American in every organization engages in on a daily basis? Please, look, the government should not be in the business of banning or stopping books or research or journalism, obviously. But if you want to publish a book or research or journalism, you should be aware that some people are going to disagree, and either you you can take that heat or you can't. It is as simple as that. The government has no role in regulating speech. The marketplace of ideas is allegedly what we're all here to do, and some people can vote with it.
Okay. What is up? I take a call. Let me see. Oh, okay. Hi. How are you?